I'm just kidding. It's me, Ezra. I do have some bananas, though. They are not Chiquita. I swear to you that. We're doing a little episode. It is not Beauty and the Beast, but it might as well be. Hey, big and beautiful Krista, how you doing?
You're sweet. Well, I'm not sure some folks are saying that about me in Quebec right now.
Now, there is a reason I'm dressed up as a baboon.
There is.
I have been hairy on the show before. I did the broadcast without a shirt on.
I remember.
One day.
It's burnt in my memory.
Yeah, I apologize. Some things, once you see them, you can never unsee them. I'll need some advice from you for an esthetician. I gotta do a little manscaping.
I can help you with
But listen, we're joking around today because I don't mind our furry friends, but it's generally an insult to call someone a baboon.
Generally.
Now, you tell me what's going on, because you first detected this story. We have been called by one of our competitors in Quebec, actually a radio station, baboons, and not just us. Our viewers, our dear saintly viewers, have been called baboons.
We're feeding them bananas. Right. They're baboons.
What's the story? Tell me the story, because there's a serious story here.
The story is very simple. The Oscar nominations were announced a number of weeks ago, and I thought to myself, as we continue our sort of journey of enlightenment on funding to the arts on Canada Live, I thought to myself, I wonder if any public money went into some of these films. Well, sure enough, public money went into a number of them. Not just Monsieur Lazare, which is a Quebec-based production that's been nominated in the category of Best Foreign Film, but as well another production called In Darkness that was done by a Toronto-based production company was nominated in the category of Best Foreign Film. It received public money as well, though substantially less. But the Quebec media is ignoring the fact that we examined funding to an English Canada-produced film as well.
I mean, that's our beef. We have nothing against the arts. In fact, as you can see, I do performance art all the time. That's my beautiful painting in the background. I'm talking about should the government have to pay for it?
Well, that's exactly it.
So I have a little gorilla hair in my mouth.
That's understandable.
You know, those phrases are hard to explain at home.
But I do think that it's an entirely fair question for us to ask at this juncture, Ezra, as to whether or not the taxpayer has essentially cut a check for a group of elites in Quebec to attend the Oscars. Well, because here's why. When we looked into this, okay, we looked at the production budget, which is $3.7 million.
That's right.
More than $2 million comes from a federal cultural agency called Telefilm. On top of that, the producers are getting about $1 million in tax credits, okay? In terms of how much skin they actually have in the game, the total private sector contributions to this film, the $3.7 million one, is about $450K. In terms of what the producers themselves actually put into the film.
So it's barely 10%. So this is almost a 90% government project in an era of austerity when we're going to see cuts in the budget.
I think it's even worse than that. I think, yes, the private investment constitutes about 12% of the film, but in terms of what a percentage of that 12%, the producers put their own money into the thing.
Right.
That question remains unanswered. They won't tell us, the government won't tell us, and what's more troubling to me is what are they taking out of the pot, Ezra? They're paying themselves producers' fees. The government won't tell us, nor will the producers. So they're getting more out of this than what they're putting in. We don't know.
You know, you're asking questions, real journalistic questions about government accountability and spending accountability that no other journalist asks. In fact, they do the opposite. In response to your fair, legitimate questions that should be asked of any government expense, a Montreal radio station, I'm just going to want to get this right, called 98.5, called Montreal Maintenant, mocked us as baboons feeding bananas to our viewers. We've got a clip of the audio with some translation. Let's roll that first clip now, Chris. I'd like your comments afterwards. Let's take a look.
Je pense que c'est Ezra Levant qui a participé à ce freak show-là. Ezra Levant, tu sais c'est qui? C'est le même gars qui a fait une entrevue avec un de ses recherchistes déguisé en poulet parce que James Moore, le ministre du Patrimoine, ne voulait pas venir en entrevue chez lui. Tu comprends? Poulet, peur.
Ah ouais, chicken. Okay, chicken, l'expression chicken, avoir peur.
So these two hosts, I mean, I've actually never talked about this film before. I'm not that familiar with the facts. I'm learning from you today, and I'm grateful. They are basically saying we're buffoons over here for daring to ask questions that real journalists should. What do you make of that?
Well, they're not alone, actually. They've received some support, you might say, from some of their other colleagues in the mainstream media, within the Quebec media. I mean, for instance, La Presse was particularly vicious in its criticism of this network and our viewers for exploring this issue. If I can just read very briefly an excerpt from a piece that was recently written in La Presse by Marc Cassivi. It's like a return to the Stone Age in an era where the human brain was developed enough to pick berries, but not enough to exercise discretion. If Krista Erickson knew anything other than the number of her hair dye, she would know that she chose the worst possible example to substantiate her claims of wasteful spending. Monsieur Lazar, whose $3.7 million budget is modest even by Quebec and Canadian film standards, has done unexpectedly well at the box office. I mean, here's the good news. The taxpayer, in this case, did not pay for this hair dye. But the bad news is, Ezra, is that we still don't have an answer to a lot of these questions. But I do think that the way that the Quebec media has reacted to our questions actually only serves to reinforce the things that we're asking. So, for instance, if Monsieur Lazar is not only a critically acclaimed film, but it's also a commercial success, breaking box office records or whatever,
then why
that
do I have
proves
to
the point.
subsidize?
Exactly. Why are we paying for it?
Let me roll one more clip. Here's one more excerpt from their rant calling us and our viewers baboons. Look at this.
Ce qui est intéressant avec Sun News, personnellement, ce que je trouve, c'est que ça donne la parole à un autre Canada. T'sais, un Canada qu'on connaît un peu moins, de redneck, des babouins incultes. Là, ils ont trouvé un réseau de TV qui leur donne des bananes, puis c'est extrêmement divertissant quand tu y penses.
Alors, le meilleur moyen de faire taire les babouins, ce serait que M. Lazare, en plus, revienne avec l'Oscar d'Hollywood.
Now, I don't mind people calling me names. I mean, I know how cultured or not I am. I know how smart or not I am. I don't care what some strangers say. But to call our viewers, to call them Neanderthals and baboons and idiots is a kind of snobbery and condescension that there was really no antidote before the Sun. I believe that kind of you know, they're just so pleased with themselves, and they're all in on it together. They hate us, Krista, because we're giving a voice to that other Canada they like to disparage.
And they do it at their own peril. You know, the Sun News Network is a new network, so our audience is not as substantial as we hope it to be in the months and years ahead. But there are 10 million Canadians who read the newspapers in the Sun media chain. I mean, we're not just asking these questions, you know, because it's particularly entertaining for us, maybe entertaining for them. These are questions of significant public interest that our readers and our viewers expect us to ask because it is their money. It's not theirs. You know, what I have learned in asking these questions, Ezra, and exploring these topics is there are elites and then there are elites. I mean, these people represent a whole new hierarchy of the elites, of the elites, of the elites. And they really are the last people that need our help at a time in this country when we're talking about things like big government program spending. Should we change the age of retirement in this country from 65 to 67 in terms of qualification for OAS? But somehow we have the money to support the pet projects of the elites, of the elites, of the elites in Quebec so they can go to the Oscars?
Krista, I'm becoming a baboon just listening to you.
Well, then I better feed you some bananas. You must be hungry.
Don't make me fling my poo at you. Krista, thanks for joining us here today. Hey, folks, stick around. So much more after the break.